All right, so let's get started. Thanks everyone for joining us today at our October Garden Talk. I'm Jan Beglinger. I am the Master Gardener Coordinator here in Genesee County, New York. Now that we have a wider presence, I should tell people where we are. We're in Batavia, New York. And I'm going to be doing winter bird feeding. This is kind of a basic overview, but if you've been bird feeding for a while, you might pick some things up. And if you're new to bird feeding, hopefully this will give you some good tips and pointers. So most people aren't aware that over 100 North American bird species will supplement their natural diets with birdseed, suet, fruit, and nectar that they can obtain from feeders. Every year, millions of people discover the pleasure of attracting birds to their yards. I know I've been feeding birds and bird landscaping my yard for years. Birds just add color, liveliness, and music to our yards year round. They're wild creatures, so of course they bring nature right to our windows. And I think birds are pretty fascinating. So if you have children or grandchildren, bird watching is a great way to get them interested in nature. Birds are also beneficial. They eat lots of insects, and some will even pollinate our flowers. They're pretty easy to attract with a relatively small investment, and this can start you on a fascinating hobby. And of course, it doesn't want to move forward. There we go. So what's on the menu? If you are new to bird feeding, I know the selection, if you walk into a store, can be kind of overwhelming. You basically want to know what birds you want to attract so you can tailor your choice to their favorites. The other thing to consider is cost. You can spend a lot of money on some of those specialty mixes, but you can also do it somewhat inexpensively to have a number of birds show up. So you can either set a big buffet or you can keep it simple. So we'll go through some of the options that you have, and hopefully that birdseed aisle won't seem so daunting. I have heard that birdseed prices will be increasing this year for a variety of reasons, so just keep that in mind. So probably the most popular, and if you're only going to pick one thing to feed, it would be the black oil sunflower seed. These are very desirable to a large variety of birds: finches, cardinals, grosbeaks, your titmice, chickadees, nuthatches, jays, all love it. The black oil seeds have a thinner hull, so many of the birds with the smaller beaks can crack them open. And they also have a high oil and fat content, making them very desirable for winter for that much needed energy. And there are multiple kinds of sunflowers. You can also find the striped sunflowers, which have a heavier shell, and the cardinals really love those. So birds with the heavier beaks can open those. The chipped or the heart sunflowers are hulled, and they're nice because then you don't have the hulls on the ground. If you're feeding on your deck or something, you don't have that extra mess, and any bird can access those because they don't have to take the hull off. They are a bit more expensive because they had been hulled. But what I like to do is feed them during the coldest part of the winter. It just gives the bird ready access to the food, and it gives them that extra energy. You can also grow your own sunflowers. The birds will find them even if you just leave them out. If you grow a lot and you want to dry them or cut them, you want to make sure that they are thoroughly dried before you store them, because they will mold or rot pretty easily. White millet is also a very popular food, especially for many of our small-beaked ground feeding birds. The white proso millet has a high protein content. It will attract mourning doves, song sparrows, juncos, white-crowned sparrows, white-throated sparrows, and even red-winged blackbirds. On the downside, it will also attract house sparrows and cowbirds, which most of us don't want in our yards. It can be hard to find to buy it just on its own. You might need to go to a specialty birdseed store or maybe a feed store that has a good birdseed line. Now, safflower seed, a lot of people feed this thinking that their cardinals are going to love it. but this has a bitter taste. So people sometimes will feed it if they have a squirrel problem, because squirrels and house sparrows usually won't eat it. It is being marketed as a selective food for cardinals, but they won't eat it unless it's the only thing at your feeder. So if you're offering sunflower seed, they'll ignore the safflower. Chickadees, doves, and finches will also eat it, but again, only if black oil is not available. The NYJER thistle, this is a very small, fine seed that a lot of the finches like. The seed, it's actually grown in Ethiopia and India. It does contain 40% oil, which makes it a very good food for the winter. But that high oil also means that it can go rancid fairly quickly. So it's not a seed you want to store. You want to buy it fresh. And if you notice that the birds stopped eating it, it could be because the seed went rancid. Now, this is a very favorite food for our American goldfinches, house finches, purple finches, and then on some of our winter finches like the pine siskins, red poles, and actually sometimes chickadees will even come for it. So this isn't the thistle that grows out in our yard. This is something that we do import. Birdseed mixes are pretty popular, and they're popular with birds too, especially if you feed on or near the ground. You do want to be careful though, because birdseed mixes can attract some of those less desirable species like European starlings or house sparrows, even grackles. You want to look for the better mixes. They mainly would have sunflower and white millet and probably some cracked corn. Be aware of those cheap mixes that look like they're a deal, because they include a lot of seeds that our birds will ignore, such as wheat, milo, and the red millet. And actually, this is probably a less expensive mix here, because the larger reddish seeds are that red millet that they don't like, or the milo. Let me see here. Yeah, that's the milo. So cracked corn is usually part of the mix. Cracked corn can be beneficial. Birds can use it in their crop. We'll talk a little bit more about corn in a future slide. Suet, many of us use the suet cakes. These help to attract the insect feeding birds to our feeders, like our woodpeckers, nuthatches, chickadees, maybe even a mockingbird if they're still around later in the fall. Suet's rich in heat producing calories. Suet cakes are what you see here. They lots of times have seed mixed into them. I like to buy the ones that don't have the extra seed, because you'd see the birds are picking those seeds out. They have grease on them. That's not good for them to get on their feathers. Real suet, which is what's in this photo with the downy woodpecker. Real suet is a hard white animal fat, usually comes from beef. You might be able to get it from the store or a butcher. Suet will begin, the real suet will begin to melt at about 70 degrees, and it will turn rancid. So it's something you just want to feed in the winter. That dripping fat or the grease can damage the natural waterproofing on bird feathers. All right, so in the winter, I like to make, especially during the coldest part of winter, I make my own mix with, this is a peanut butter, cornmeal, whole wheat flour mix. And I make it into like a cookie dough, and then you can just put it into the cracks of the tree, or you can also push it into one of those feeder logs. But peanut butter, it's relatively inexpensive way to offer a higher protein food in the winter. It's high energy fat. It's also an excellent substitute for some of the more expensive nut meats. Protein in general is scarce in the winter for the birds, and fortunately, they don't require quite as much as they do when they are growing or reproducing. I don't really have a recipe for this that I make. I just throw in a cup or so of peanut butter, and I start adding the cornmeal and the wheat flour until I get a consistency of a pretty solid cookie dough that you could roll into a ball. And then I do store it in the refrigerator and use it. I usually put out a little bit every day, and they find it pretty quickly. So corn can be offered in a number of ways. Blue jays, sparrows, crows, juncos, blackbirds, and many others love crack corn. The crack corn, however, is vulnerable to rot since it will soak up moisture quickly. So if that's in a mix and you're feeding on the ground, it might get moldy. Ear corn is popular. I know I feed it, and my red-bellied woodpeckers like that. Corn makes a great winter food because it's high in carbohydrates, so it's good for keeping birds warm. The downside to corn is a lot of other things also like it, including deer and squirrels. So they will actually come up, the deer will come up and eat the corn if you have it exposed. Peanuts. I like to feed peanuts. It's fun to watch the birds take these. Peanuts in the shell or shelled will attract woodpeckers, blue jays, chickadees, titmice, and nuthatches. You can provide them in some tube-shaped metal mesh feeders, or I just place the shelled ones on open trays so the birds have access to it. You also can have more birds have access to it that way. If you want to watch the birds, take them, put them out when you go feed them. Don't put them out the night before, they'll be gone. Also, you can buy peanuts from birdseed stores, but if you happen to have some in the cupboard, just make sure that they don't have salt on them. Birds don't need salt either. Like I said, I prefer to feed the shelled ones. More birds have access to them that way. And my blue jays love them. I usually just put them out on a pan or a tray, and I've watched them take as many as 8 at one time and try to stuff them into their crop. So I don't feed a lot at one time. I usually just put out maybe half a cup or so in the morning. Mealworms, yum, yum for birds. This is their yummy candy. They have a high protein level, so you can buy them live at pet shops, or you can also order them online. You want to make sure that what you're feeding them in doesn't have any holes that they can escape out of. There are special mealworm feeders, or you can put them in a cup. You can also raise your mealworms if you really get into feeding them a lot. That can take some time. The mealworms are a treat to bluebirds and some of our songbirds that wouldn't normally come to a seed feeder. It also might be something you want to do like in the spring when we have robins back and maybe we're getting some bad weather. You could put some mealworms out for them if there's snow on the ground. You can also buy them dry, or I think these were roasted. I have not had great luck with the dried mealworms. I have tried putting them out in the spring for like our robins or some of the other birds if we do get a late snowstorm. So I try them occasionally, but I just don't have much luck. They do prefer the live mealworms, at least in my experience. So chocolate, I want to take a minute to just say chocolate's a big no-no. It's poisonous to birds. Some people do like to put out stale bakery goods, so there might be chocolate in those. That's not a good idea, even to use bread or other bakery products. It's not really good for the birds, and it will attract other critters to your feeding area. So let's talk about storing the bird seed. We want to keep the seed dry. We don't want it to get wet. That can lead to mold and rot issues. I like to use metal garbage cans. I have had chipmunk or squirrel or somebody chew through even my Rubbermaid plastic ones. So now everything gets stored in metal. You want to keep the lids on so the mice can't get in there. You want to keep your seed in a cool, dry location. You want to avoid storing it where maybe it will heat up, especially even in the summer. You don't want that to happen because it can destroy the nutrition and taste of sunflower seeds. This also leads me to saying, if you only feed through the winter into spring, don't save your seed through the summer. Go ahead and feed it till it's gone. That way you won't end up with mealworms in it. It won't, deteriorate while it's sitting in a hot garage. So let's talk about feeders. Now that we've determined what type of food we want to feed, maybe there are such a variety of feeders. You want to think of the birds first. They should be functional. They should be made of durable materials so you're not replacing them every year. They should keep the seed clean and dry. You also want to provide easy access for the birds and for yourself if you have to clean them. Birds, like people, have preferences as to where they want to feed. It could be on the ground or up in a tree. Some birds will prefer the small perches. Some want to feed in an open table. So again, we're looking at what birds we want to attract. So let's start with tube feeders because these are probably one of the most popular. They tend to be some kind of long, slender, usually plastic, sometimes metal or mesh. They have multiple feeding ports or perches. You usually can hang them from a tree or some kind of pole or shepherd's hook. Some models attach multiple tubes together so you can feed different types of seed at one time. They should be simple. Their snap apart assembly should make cleaning less of a chore. If you are looking at trying to keep some of the bigger birds away, look for ones with smaller perches or portals. That'll make it harder for the larger birds to use. And tubular feeders are usually for sunflower seed, especially if they have the larger holes. The one here that I've got pictured on the left, that's actually kind of a mesh one that I use to feed out my hulled sunflower seed. So it's small enough that they don't just, the birds can get the seed through it, but they don't just flow out. And then if you're going to feed the NYJER thistle, there are specific feeders for that. They have very tiny ports. Sometimes they're finch feeders. They actually have the opening below the perch because goldfinches can feed upside down. You might also get it in the sock, which you see on the right-hand side. Frequently, you can find the socks already filled with NYJER seed, or you can refill them. A lot of finches can hang from that. With the NYJER seed, because it does get rancid, you just want to make sure that you keep it fresh and that your feeders don't have a lot of dead space at the bottom because it will just collect there and it can rot and mold. So the hopper feeders are very popular with people and birds. Basically, they're a pretty simple setup. They usually have a cover. You lift the cover up, you put the bird seed in. They're good for mixes. They're good for sunflower seed. Some of them, like this one on the top, you can even add the SUET cakes to it. The roof does help keep everything clean and dry. And usually you can put enough seed in here for a couple of days, so then you don't have to fill it every day during the winter. Some of them, like the one on the right, they might be weighted so that squirrels can't get into them. Maybe. Squirrels are tricky. Then the tray feeders, these everybody can feed from tree feeders. Any kind of seed can be put in those as long as it's not going to fall through it. There are ones that are pole mounted, or you can hang them, or if they have legs, you can put them on the ground. Some have a roof, many don't. The platform should have plenty of drainage holes so that the water will go through and not get the seed too wet. If you are feeding in a platform, I like to only put out what I think the birds are going to eat in a day so that it doesn't get wet or to get snow on top of it. If we get even like an inch of snow, the birds sometimes won't dig through that snow to find the seed below it. Platform feeders are excellent for attracting ground feeding birds, such as our doves, juncos, and many of our native sparrows. And basically any type of bird can use a platform feeder. And there's also other seed feeders that you can find. You can make your own. In the top left corner here is a pine cone feeder that you just put peanut butter on and then roll it in seed. You can hang it in a tree. That's a great project to do with kids. The middle top is a metal no-no feeder is what they're called. I like them. They hold a lot of seed. They're made of metal. They last a fairly long time. A lot of birds can hang from them. The downside to that one is it's kind of open to the weather, but for the winter, it's usually a pretty good choice. On the far right are the formed cakes that you can buy. They're basically, you can buy them around Christmas time, you hang them out. They're a nice present for that bird feeder person who has everything. Down on the bottom left is bird feeder with suction cups, a small one that you can actually attach to your window if you want to try to bring birds up close. Not a lot of birds will probably use that because it is smaller, but you can probably attract some chickadees like there are in this photo. And then of course, there are a lot of decorative feeders, so you should be able to find something in any shape, size, style that you're looking for. Many of them are a hopper type, but there's basically something out there for everyone. SUET feeders also come in a wide variety. I mean, many of us use the small plastic coated ones that you can just hang here on the bottom. The left and right bottom ones are both the just the simple squares that you can hang. There's a mockingbird on one and a downy woodpecker on the other. I like the feeders that have the access just from the bottom and then they have a top. Those are supposed to keep the other sparrows and grackles and starlings from accessing it. Only the birds that can hang upside down and feed will generally use those. It's the nuthatches and the woodpeckers. Occasionally you'll have a house sparrow that figures it out and he'll kind of flutter there, but they can't eat as much as if you had it in one of the other ones. The top middle is one of the ones where you can put the logs in, or that peanut butter mix that I talked about. And then the top right is actually that long extension is for the larger woodpeckers. It's a tail rest for them. But as you can see, the downies will also come to it. So there's a variety of miscellaneous feeders. If you're looking at feeding fruit or mealworms, there's two on the left here are both fruit skewers along with a bowl to put mealworms in. The middle top is specifically for bluebirds. You can either feed those bluebird treats or the mealworms will go in that. The bluebirds actually go through the hole and enter the feeder. Other birds won't do that. So that will keep your mealworms just for your bluebirds. And then we have a couple ways to feed peanuts here. The one on the far right is just the pan that I put out. I've got some drainage holes in it and I put my peanuts in that. Now my dad, he liked to just watch the birds, and he would take some ear corn and just put it in the back of his Adirondack chair and the birds would show up. And then on the right is how I feed my ear corn. I think it was actually a peanut feeder that wasn't really working, so I switched it over to ear corn. So as you can see, you can get creative. There's a lot of different ways you can feed corn. All right, baffles. If you've been battling squirrels, you probably are aware of baffles. They're supposed to keep unwanted critters from getting to your feeders. You can buy them or you can make your own. You can attach an inverted sheet metal cone, which is at least 18 inches in diameter. You can try PVC pipe or stove pipe that's at least 6 inches in diameter and 18 inches long and put that on your pole. My mom got creative. She just took a 2-liter pop bottle and that worked on her pole to keep the squirrels off, at least for a while. If you are suspending your feeders from a horizontal wire that they can tightrope across, you might want to try plastic soda bottles on that, or maybe some old CDs. I've even heard of people trying to use slinkies so that the squirrels can't climb up the slinky. If we're feeding birds, we want to make sure that they're safe when they're in our yard. So we definitely want to prevent window strikes. Ornithologists estimate that millions of birds are killed each year by hitting windows. So you need to break up that reflection. If you go outside and look at your house from a bird's perspective, your windows are actually reflecting the sky, the trees around, and it looks like a safe path for them to fly through. So we want to break up the reflections by either using some of those silhouettes you can buy. You need to put a number of those on, not just one. You can also try some other tricks. Some bird watchers attach streamers or suction cup feeders to their windows. I've seen people use crisscross branches around their windows, awning, or even just having the window screen up can help. If those things don't work, as you can see through this picture, they actually put up the deer netting that keeps the birds from hitting that window. A couple other things you can do, you can actually put your feeders closer to the window within 3 feet. When a bird takes off from 3 feet, if they hit the window, they don't have enough momentum going to hurt themselves. The other option is to put them at least 30 feet away. And then that way the window isn't as much of a clear path that they would be thinking of. The birds can have other directions that they can leave from. We also want to keep our feeders clean. They should be clean relatively frequent. Birds can become ill if leftover bits of seeds and hulls become moldy or bird droppings accumulate under your feeders. So you want to do some cleanup. It's best to wash your feeders thoroughly with soapy water, and then you can soak them in a 10% bleach solution. If you use bleach, make sure you thoroughly rinse and then air dry, because you don't want any bleach residue left on the feeders. Also remember to rake the ground below your feeder to prevent accumulation of waste. Maybe move your feeders around or hang them from different trees at different times. Just try to keep that waste limited. In the winter, of course, you're going to get snow and you can't really move the feeders then, but you'll have to do some cleanup in the spring. You might see some disease. You're most likely to see the house finch eye disease. This started showing up in finches, I think, around 1994. The birds get these crusty eyes. Sometimes they'll actually crust over. The birds will become blind. And it mainly affects house finches. It can affect goldfinches. You might see this avian pox, where they get these warty growths on their unfeathered areas. I've never seen that. Yeah, I can't say that word. All right, that's caused by a bacteria belonging to the Salmonella family. It is fatal to birds, and it can be caused by fecal contamination of food and water by sick birds. And then aspergillosis. This is a fungal disease that affects the respiratory system. It's common in decaying vegetable matter, especially corn and peanuts, which is why I don't feed corn or peanuts in the summer, because the humidity can make them get moldy. So anytime you see sick birds, you probably want to do a good cleaning of your feeders. If there's more than one bird, I would take your feeders down for a couple of days to a week, just to kind of disperse the birds so that they're not coming in contact with any sick birds. You do want to make sure that you're cleaning your feeding station regularly. If you have bird baths out, you want to make sure you clean those regularly. Yeah, and always wash and dry your hands thoroughly after you've fed the birds, cleaned your feeders, or if you've handled a dead bird. Now, only veterinarians and people who are rehabilitators can handle a sick bird or take in a sick bird. So what else is there? For anyone who has to jump off at the half-hour mark, I am recording this, so we'll put it up on YouTube. Well, if you're interested in feeding birds, maybe you want to do a little bit of backyard habitat, or improve your landscape to have the birds actually stick around and not just come in and get seed. So of course, birds need food, water, shelter, and in the spring they need nesting spaces. So there's a number of things that you can do to help provide these things. One, of course, is food. So you can add in berry producing plants or evergreens that produce cones. I like sumac for the winter. That's great for our robins and the bluebirds. So by adding in some fruit producing plants, you are actually going to be bringing in some birds that may not necessarily show up at your seed feeders. Here's an example of robins and a crabapple tree. I actually took this photo in January one year. And of course, our goldfinch on an evening primrose stalk. and they are eating the dried seeds of those. So I leave a lot of my seed heads up in the garden for the winter and then cut things back in the spring. Water is important year round, and there are ways that you can offer water in the winter if you don't have a pond or other water source that's natural. There are heaters available, which you can use in your bird bath, or you can buy a heated bird bath. I actually like to use a heated dog bowl, water bowl. You can fill it right up to the top. The birds will sit on the edge. If it's a little too slippery, you can just rub it down with a little sandpaper, give it something where they can grip. You do want to keep them cleaned out. I like the heated dog bowl because it's got a thermostat in it. And I have found it actually lasts longer for me than some of those heated bird baths. You want to make sure you use weather appropriate bird baths. Don't leave your ceramic bird bath out in the winter, or that is likely to crack. Winter shelter. Birds want to stay warm in the winter. They want to get out of the wind or wet weather. So having a lot of evergreens around is great. Birds actually stay warm by shivering and puffing up their feathers and consuming high-fat foods for their energy. So you can also add some of these little nesting or roosting spots. This one's made out of woven grass. Sometimes you can find these in the store or online. I like to put them in amongst the evergreens, so it just gives them a little extra protection. Evergreens that go down to the ground are also great because sometimes they can find food under there. And you can also buy roosting boxes. These are similar to the nesting boxes, but as you can see, they have extra perches in them. So families of chickadees and bluebirds will roost in these together when it gets cold. Dead trees, woodpeckers will use these for nesting sites as well as overwintering sites. Chickadees and other cavity nesters will go into dead trees for where there's a hole and shelter there. Small brush piles can also be good spots for them to get out of the wind. And as I said, evergreens are probably one of the best things you can have. So if you're feeding birds, you're probably going to get some other visitors. The main one is the squirrels, and everyone, you might love them, you might not. Raccoons can also be a problem. Sometimes with raccoons, your only option is to bring your feeders in at night. Same with deer. They all love birdseed. So we can try to outwit them, but squirrels is very difficult. I don't have a lot of silver bullet options for squirrels. You can try some of the squirrel-proof feeders, which we see on the left here that didn't work so well. The one thing about squirrels is they can jump and climb. So anything that's within about 12 feet of a tree or something that they can climb up on, they will probably be into. And then we also have bird predators. There are actually some hawks that are bird predators, and you might see them visiting your feeders in the winter, mainly the Cooper and the sharp-shinned hawk. They are also protected by law, so you can't really do anything to deter them. If you do have a young one that decides to come sit at your feeders and scares all your birds away, you can take your feeders down for a few days and hopefully they'll move on. With our kitty cats, unfortunately, they do kill hundreds of millions of birds every year. They are especially vulnerable for the ground feeding and ground nesting birds and fledglings. Feeder birds can also be easy prey. If you own a cat, Audubon strongly recommends that you keep it indoors so that it is not killing our birds. Your cat will benefit too because, indoor cats live longer, healthier lives. If you do have neighborhood cats that roam, you just want to make sure that your bird feeders are placed so that the cats can't just pounce out at any bird that might be feeding on the ground beneath your feeder. So come and get it. With bird feeding, it's all about location, location, location. There are some key points to consider when you decide where to put your feeder. It's really not as simple as hanging it from the nearest tree. You want to think about things like too many birds in one spot, accommodating various feeding styles and preferences. You also want to think about possible hazards to the birds, like your windows or prowling cats and thieving squirrels, and even traffic. Are the birds, when they leave your feeder, are they going to fly across the road? And where do the winter winds blow? You actually want to put your feeder in the winter someplace somewhat protected, so they're not right out in the howling winds and snow. So this was one of my setups from quite a few years ago. The landscape's changed a bit since then, but I always put feeders at different levels. The sparrows, juncos, and doves usually feed on the ground, while your finches, cardinals might feed from shrubs or at a feeder on a pole. Excuse me. And then a lot of birds like chickadees, titmice, and woodpeckers want to feed higher up in the trees. So to avoid crowding and attract the greatest variety of species, I try to provide the table-like feeders for the ground feeders, hopper or tube feeders for the shrub and tree top feeders, and then suet feeders in a pole or in a tree so that our insect-eating birds can have access to those. Excuse me. You also want to put them near some shelter so that they have a quick escape if a hawk comes through, but not too close so that the cats can't pounce on them. Feeding on the ground. I do feed on the ground in the winter. It's really nice if you can feed under an evergreen like this where the snow doesn't cover it and they have some protection right away. The cons to feeding on the ground is it will attract other critters, varmints. The seed can get covered up by the snow, it can get wet. So if I do feed on the ground, I try to only feed the amount that I think the birds will eat during the day. Just two different setups here, just the tube feeder with the hulled sunflower hearts in them. We actually have a red poll there with American goldfinch. And then on the right hand is a nice setup. We've got an evergreen tree with a hopper feeder. The dog bowl water is on the floor of the deck there, and a pole feeder. And I think there's probably a suet feeder in there too. But the other thing to keep in mind is if you're spending all this money on feeding the birds, make sure you put those feeders someplace where you can actually watch and enjoy the birds. That's, I think, the point of it for us in the winter. And of course, what is it? You're going to have to get some binoculars and maybe a bird book, because sooner or later, somebody's going to show up that you're not sure who it is. And I think the binoculars can help you see birds a little bit farther away from your window. A good field guide and a pair of binoculars will help you solve any bird mysteries. A word on binoculars: with the optics, you do get what you pay for. So if you've never bought binoculars before, go try some out and buy the most expensive pair that you can afford. It's well worth it. I like the small pair that I could carry around in my pocket, but there are the newer ones, a lot of them are lighter than they used to be. And if you're collecting feeder bird information or you're doing lists, there are some citizens science projects out there like Project Feeder Watch. Cornell, the Lab of Ornithology, runs this through the winter. It starts mid-November and it goes into March, maybe early April. That has a small fee with it just for the maintenance of the website. I think it's $18 a season, but that's a great thing to do if you have kids that maybe you want to get interested in collecting information or watching the birds. The Great Backyard Bird Count is middle of February. It's usually President's Day weekend. It's 4 days of counting birds. You just have to pick a 15-minute time slot that's convenient to you, and you count what birds are in your backyard or wherever you happen to be, and you can enter that onto their website. And then eBird is a great place if you really get into bird watching. It's a free database where you can enter all your bird sightings anywhere you are, anywhere in the world. And this is free. You just create an account and then your observations become part of a long-term database that scientists can use. So all three of those are great sites for bird watchers to use. And then just some of my sources that I put this program together with. And a little plug for our Master Gardener office. You can stop into our office Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to noon. Master Gardeners are usually here. You can also call them or email them. You can email them photos, questions. You can drop off samples and we will try to help you with your gardening questions. And you can find us on our website or on our YouTube page and Facebook. So all of our garden talks have been recorded, and this one will be up there in a week or so. And just our Cornell information. So I am going to stop sharing and see if we have any questions for folks. I'm also going to stop the recording at this point.